Another comedian gets canceled by China. Canada's election interference saga continues, and China Uncensored has been banned from Truth Social. Then more on this week's China News headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Incogni. You probably know that companies are collecting your personal data, but you may not realize just how many. Dozens, maybe hundreds, most of which you've never heard of. You have no idea what they're doing with it. Incogni helps stop them. I'll explain more at the end. Well, I never thought I would ever say this, but I have officially been untruthed. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but my account on Truth Social, which is supposed to be a free speech platform, has been suspended. I wasn't really given an explanation. Truth Social just told me that I was banned for violating their terms of service, and that indefinite bans are rare, reserved only for the most egregious violations. That's right. Of all the social media I use, it was Truth Social that banned China Uncensored. I have no idea what I could have done to have violated their terms of service. The last thing I posted was this video from our podcast, China Unscripted. Ironically, it was an interview with Miles Yu, who worked for the Trump administration as an advisor to former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Now, it's possible someone at Truth Social saw this thumbnail and thought that it was critical of Trump and banned the account, which wouldn't be a good look for a site supposedly dedicated to freedom of speech. But again, I can only guess because they haven't told me anything, except whatever I did was egregious. I've appealed the suspension and I'm still waiting to hear back from them. But this is a serious issue. All of the platforms I use, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all have deep connections with China. I could be banned at any time from any of them. That's why it's so important for you to support this show on Patreon. That ensures that no matter what censorship I have to deal with, even on free speech platforms like Truth Social, I can keep making China Uncensored. All it takes is $1 an episode at patreon.com/China Uncensored. You can also set a monthly limit. I'll keep you updated with whatever happens with Truth Social. But speaking of banning people, a few weeks ago, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill banning citizens of China from buying land in the state of Florida. The bill also bans citizens of other adversarial countries from purchasing farmland or land within 10 miles of a military installation or critical infrastructure. Now, several Chinese residents and a real estate company are trying to overturn the law, saying it's a violation of equal protection and due process rights under the U.S. Constitution's 14th Amendment. DeSantis said the law was meant to stop the influence of the Chinese Communist Party in the state.
And I look at things like farmland. It's important for community, it's important for business and jobs and the economy, but our food security is also national security. And so we don't want the CCP in charge of any of the food production.
If the law isn't overturned, it will go into effect on July 1st. DeSantis isn't the only one doubling down on Chinese interference. The State Department said this week that it won't lift U.S. sanctions on China's defense chief. This comes after President Biden made it sound like the U.S. was considering lifting the sanctions during his week-long trip to Japan for the G7 meeting.
And on China, your team has been trying to secure meetings with their Chinese counterparts. Would you consider easing some sanctions to improve relations, like the sanctions that are currently on China's defense minister?
The answer, that's under discussion.
Man, is there anything Biden's staff doesn't walk back? He says the U.S. is going to defend Taiwan, and the White House walks it back. He said they're discussing lifting sanctions, and the State Department walks it back. I bet if he said the sky was blue, the White House would walk that back too. Sorry, Joe, the sky is clearly gray today. Chinese Defense Minister Li Shangfu was sanctioned in 2018 before he became China's defense minister. The U.S. sanctioned him after he bought combat aircraft and equipment from Russia's main arms exporter. The U.S. has been trying to schedule a meeting between U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and his counterpart since the spy balloon incident. When Austin tried to call his counterpart during that whole situation, China didn't pick up the phone. Now, China's saying that there will be no meeting until the U.S. lifts the sanctions on their minister. The U.S. has said that the sanctions don't prevent Li from meeting with Austin, but anonymous sources told Bloomberg that China still wanted them removed because Li wouldn't be on equal footing with Austin if the sanctions stayed in place. And after the break, the G7 gets tough on China too. Welcome back. Now, we all know the Chinese Communist Party can't take a joke, but Uncle Roger found that out the hard way this past weekend. The UK-based comedian, who's originally from Malaysia, was banned from Chinese social media after making jabs at Xi Jinping and Chinese surveillance.
You're from Boston?
Originally from Guangzhou.
Guangzhou, China.
Yeah.
China, okay. China, good country. Good country. Good country. Good country. Woo. We have to say that now, correct? All their phone listening. All their phone listening. This nephew got Huawei phone. They all listening. All our phone tap into it. Long live presidency. Long live presidency. Whew. Uncle Roger's social credit score going up. Nice.
And as bad as it was to mock China's surveillance, I think what really got him kicked off was crossing China's red line, Taiwan.
Niece and nephew from Taiwan? Not a real country. Not a real country. I hope one day you rejoin the motherland, one China. No, don't clap too hard. This is not political show. No, don't clap. Uncle Roger gonna get cancelled after tonight. Nice, good report for Uncle Roger, okay? Dear CCP, Uncle Roger, good comrade. Don't make him disappear, please.
I'm sure Uncle Roger was crushed that he got taken off Chinese social media. After all, who could have seen that coming? Last weekend, he was removed from Weibo, China's version of Twitter, and Bilibili, China's version of YouTube. The BBC reports that a message on his Weibo account, where he has more than 400,000 followers, reads, "The user has been banned from posting as he violated relevant laws and regulations." The ironic thing is that Uncle Roger, whose real name is Nigel Ng, caused controversy just a few years ago for censoring himself about China. In 2021, he did a collaboration with US-based YouTuber and food blogger Mike Chen. The video was just about food, but Uncle Roger took it down after just a day when he found out that Chen isn't a fan of the Chinese government and posts about Chinese human rights abuses on social media. We talked to Chen after it happened on our podcast, China Unscripted. If you haven't seen it, I'll leave a link to that interview below. Now, I'm not sure who got the last laugh here. The censor, the guy who self-censored then got canceled, or the guy who got deleted but not canceled. Vote in the comments below. And guess who else is now critical of China? The G7, apparently. During its meeting this week, the Group of Seven focused heavily on China's economic coercion. In its economic joint communiqué from the meeting, it describes China's unfair trade practices, things like weaponizing economic dependencies and pervasive, opaque, and harmful industrial subsidies. The G7 is made of the US, the UK, Canada, Germany, Italy, Japan, and France. Representatives from the EU also attended. My favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, called the G7 an anti-China workshop and said it was the U.S. that was pushing hard to weave an anti-China net in the Western world. I hate to break it to you, Global Times, but China is the one weaving an anti-China net around the world. China specifically targeted Japan and the UK in its statement about the G7 summit. China's embassy in Britain urged London to stop slandering China after British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said Beijing represents the world's greatest challenge to security and prosperity. China also summoned Japan's ambassador to complain, since it was the host of this year's summit. And after the break, did Canada just hold a sham investigation into Chinese election interference? Welcome back. The U.S. House Ethics Committee has dropped its probe into California Congressman Eric Swalwell over his interactions with a suspected Chinese spy. The bipartisan committee told Swalwell this week they wouldn't take any action against him. The investigation, which started 2 years ago, looked into Swalwell's relationship with Chinese national Christine Fang, who also goes by Fang Fang. They met in 2011 when Swalwell was a councilman in Dublin, California, and she was enrolled at a Bay Area college. Fang worked on his congressional re-election campaign as recently as 2014, but Swalwell reportedly broke off communication with her in 2015, after he was alerted by the FBI that she may have been a spy. Fang left the country that same year and was never charged with a crime. Fang has also targeted other U.S. politicians, including a sexual relationship with 2 Midwestern mayors. But there was never any evidence that Fang did that with Swalwell. And speaking of investigations, Canada is currently embroiled in a controversy over Chinese election interference. Special Rapporteur David Johnston was appointed to investigate leaks in the media from Canada's intelligence community, claiming that there was widespread election interference by China in 2 federal elections. This week, he released his first report. Johnston found that foreign actors were trying to influence Canada's elections, but didn't find specific claims in the media to be true. For example, there were reports that 11 candidates in the 2019 federal election were running on behalf of and funded by Chinese interests. Johnston said there wasn't evidence that China-funded payments had been received by any candidates, although he did say there was an attempt to send money. One of the most inflammatory findings in his report is his suggestion that there should not be a public inquiry. He says that because of the classified nature of the evidence, but offered to let members of parliament see the evidence so they know he's not hiding anything. However, opposition parties are crying foul, saying there were flaws in the investigation and that Johnston's report can't be trusted because of conflicts of interest in Johnston's background. The allegations he's looking into mostly center around Canada's Liberal Party, which is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's party. Part of the investigation was about whether Trudeau knew about the allegations of election interference and whether he ignored them. Johnston said there were issues with intelligence moving up the chain of command, but that Trudeau never ignored any intelligence reports. Trudeau also appointed Johnston and said he supported Johnston's suggestion that there should not be a public inquiry. However, Johnston's involvement with the Trudeau Foundation, which was established in the name of Justin Trudeau's late father, has raised concerns about his impartiality along with his friendship with the Trudeau family. The leader of Canada's Conservative Party called Johnston a ski buddy, cottage neighbor, and family friend of Justin Trudeau, who was given a fake job by the Prime Minister and tasked with sweeping Trudeau's cover-up under the rug. And he's called for a public inquiry into the allegations. And this episode is sponsored by Incogni. Whenever you do anything online or use apps on your phone, there are a huge number of companies that collect your personal data. When I signed up for Incogni a year ago, I discovered there were dozens of data brokers that potentially had my private information without my permission. Some types of data theft you can easily stop, like by not using Temu to shop or using TikTok to whatever. But other types of data theft are harder. A lot of private companies are accessing your data because you accidentally gave permission through a third-party site. But there is a way to stop them. That's what Incogni does for you. It writes to these companies using specific legal language, forcing them to delete your private information. Incogni has already gotten my details removed from 102 of these sketchy data brokers, with a lot more in progress. And I didn't have to do anything after signing up. Incogni just handles it. So I recommend you get Incogni for yourself. Click the link below or go to incogni.com/uncensored. For a limited time, the first 100 people to use the code uncensored will get 60% off. Get your personal data off the market with Incogni. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.